Hi everyone, welcome to the Con of Champions Creating Custom Monsters panel. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Hope you're having a great virtual convention. Thank you so much for supporting tabletop events. It's a very worthy cause. We're going to be talking about creating custom monsters tonight, and we have a great panel of folks to talk to you about that. Let's start with some quick introductions, and maybe we'll just start in the top left and read left to right across the top and then the bottom, and have everybody just introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, where folks can find your work, and maybe tell us what is your favorite classic D&D monster? Go ahead and Elise, take us away.
So hey everyone, my name's Elise. You'll see me as DNDElise on Twitter and on Facebook. I'm Agrippa Green in the Discord. So I have virtual booth as a perk sponsor for Con of Champions. I am a DMs Guild and DriveThruRPG writer. Oh yeah, and my favorite monster.
Yeah.
There's so many favorites. It depends on the category. So if we're thinking cute category, that'd be the Flump. If we're thinking... And I like classic dragons for the scary stuff. So.
Excellent.
Is it my turn? Is it me?
Yes, please.
All right. My name is Domille, Dom for short. I am a cartographer, project lead, an art director, a lot of different things. DMs Guild and DriveThruRPG and Patreon, and I do a lot of Twittering sometimes not so much. And my husband plays a kobold, so I'm gonna go with kobold because it's the best ever.
Classic.
All right. Hi everybody, my name is Drew Dawes, and I'm a DMs Guild writer. And I'm on a podcast called In the Dicebox Slam. That's a live play that is pro wrestling inspired. And my favorite, and you can find me at Drew Dwarves on all the socials and mainly Twitter. And my favorite classic monster is probably giants are the ones I like to use the most as a DM.
Giants. Awesome.
I'm Kerry Jordan, DMs Guild creator. You can find me there. You can try shooting me stuff on Twitter. I might actually see it on occasion. That's Candid Kerry with a K for Candid. Just, I don't know. It seemed to work. But anyway, so favorite monster, we're going to go undead of some sort probably. Lately, what I've been looking at is Mummy, but that's just because it's what I've been looking at lately, probably.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name's Micah. I am from Pyromaniac Press. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook and on the Discord as Pyromaniac Press. I'm a DMs Guild writer. Also write for DriveThruRPG. I've done a couple of Kickstarters. My favorite classic monster has got to be the gelatinous cube. I'm not a particularly neat person, but I love the idea of a dungeon cleaner. I think they're fantastic. I think it's all very eco-friendly, recyclable, just fantastic monsters. Can't get enough of them. Most of my dungeons have at least one.
Awesome. Yeah. I've seen plenty of classic gelatinous cube encounters. Those are great. I'm Paul, everyone. I'm your moderator tonight. You can find me right here on Wandering DMs. That's where you are right now, so I don't think you need any help with that one. So let's get started. We're going to chat a little bit about creating custom monsters. I'm trying to reserve a little bit of time towards the end for some Q&A, but feel free to shoot your questions into the chat at any time, and I will queue them up for display later towards the end of the conversation. But let's talk about, I guess, let's start with a little background, I guess, of where we've invented custom monsters. Is anyone working on something right now with a custom monster in it? Anyone got one on the? Yeah, all right. Tell us about
it. So right now I'm kind of reworking some content for a release called Tartarus. So for Uncaged, I did a Egyptian underworld dungeon, and I wanted to keep going with underworld. So for Tartarus, it's ancient Greek underworld, and I'm currently building stat blocks for Hades and some classic monsters like the Cyclops.
Awesome. So, are you adding new Egyptian themed monsters? It's kind of interesting to me because actually my one title on DMs Guild, it features Egyptian themed gnolls.
So for this one, it'll
Nice.
be like Greek mythology.
Greek, excellent.
For Tartarus, yeah. And I'm pulling from actual mythology as much as possible when I'm building them, but I'm definitely building like fresh new monsters with like kind of new abilities.
Cool. And anybody else got something in the works right now with some custom monsters in it? Or have something recent that you've published that you want to talk about?
Well, I've got something in the works. I don't know when it'll eventually get out there, but it's mainly a conversion from older editions, some older edition monsters. But in a lot of ways, that's a custom monster too, because you start trying to target it to certain levels and keep the feel, but have the mechanics for 5th edition. So it's to me, it's a lot like just making it whole cloth almost, except you've got certain rails you've got to stay on so that it's identifiable as that monster, right?
Right.
Even though these are actually custom in the adventure, you still want them recognizable. People who like that adventure, that's presumably why they're purchasing the conversion.
I mean, a lot of the famous monsters, right, started out as a custom monster in a module from long ago, right, and then leaked their way into official canon. As an old school guy myself, I think I often am surprised at some of the choices made when they're adapted into 5th edition. I think recently I was looking at Manticore, and I was like, what do you mean it's only CR3? Shouldn't it be much more deadly than that? What's going on?
I think in a lot of ways also, you especially when you're converting old monsters, as Kerry said, you want to keep the flavor, you want to keep the expectation, but I think also in some cases you want to subvert expectations. A lot of players do like the old monsters, but have played for a long time, have seen them, know what they do. They walk into a room, you describe it, they go, it's one of those. I know what that does, right? And it kind of takes that wonder out for them. So I often what I will try to do with the older style monsters is give them something else, something appropriate, but something that shows the players that are a little bit experienced and in some cases a little bit jaded, something new to see. I like monster variations, things that, look like they should, act like they should, but might have one or two little extra bits that really jazz them up and give them a bit more life.
Yeah, and one of the things that gets a little difficult is, or where I start at usually when creating these monsters or converting monsters or whatever, when I'm sitting there trying to work out stat blocks, I'm usually targeting, what character levels I want it for. That's where I'm starting from, right? So you may have this monster that appeared in this adventure, but it's, the power levels and stuff just don't match up to 5th edition. So you're having to tweak them. I found usually down and so therefore you're really messing with that power or ability or pulling it in some way to make sure you're hitting the right target levels or for the encounter you want.
Yeah, well, that ties in with what Paul was saying, that, I mean, some of the conversions haven't come across directly the same way. I've found the same thing. I mean, I've been gaming for too long, probably, and I've been through many editions, and I do have my favorites and the classics and so forth, and it's exactly as you say, Paul. Some of these things you look at, Manticore, that should be a lot tougher, because in older editions it was a lot tougher. Or other things we go, I'm guilty of this, of going, right, I'm going to make an adventure for my players. I'll just use that, and I'll just use that, and I'll just use that. And then I actually get to them. Often I'm winging it a little bit anyway, and I get to the monster, I'm like, whoa, this thing's going to kill them. I can't use this directly the way I thought I could.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely some conversion changes there. But you know what? I mean, I often think that's a good thing. Again, it's about especially the people who've been through the different editions to be able to, you know, take on a manticore that you think, oh my god, this is a huge, powerful, deadly monster. For them to be taking it on at, say, you know, 3rd level or even 2nd level with a big party, it's a bit of a thrill for older gamers, I think, because their immediate reaction is, oh my god, we're going to die, and that kind of puts a little bit more immediacy onto the encounter. But they get a balanced encounter theoretically for what they're doing. But it, you know, again, it's about subverting expectations. They're not expecting this to be a balanced encounter. I do like the idea of putting players in the mindset of we're at a lot more risk than we actually are, because let's face it, as a DM, you never really want to kill off your player characters too often. You want there to be a level of risk, but you certainly want them to feel like at any moment this is it for them. Otherwise, without the tension, what's the point?
It sort of reminds me of monster designs where you had monsters that were specifically meant to look like much scarier monsters, right? Like the gas spore that looks an awful lot like a beholder, but is not actually that bad.
Yeah, but I mean, that's such a mean trick as well, though, right? It's basically it's just a trap. Well, I'm going to run up and hit the beholder with my sword. Kaboom!
I do really love looking at all the old, like the pictures, the illustrations through each edition, because I played many of the older editions. So when I'm writing something and I'm using one specific monster, I'll do the research and see, oh, this is, you know, the 4th edition and the 3rd and the 2nd and the original, and it's just this little black and white sketch. And I was like, oh wow. Come to like the current ones where it's this amazing full page, you know, illustration. So that's really neat to see.
Well, and a lot of those early illustrations, they were teenagers drawing that stuff. Back when it was, you know, out of Lake Geneva and they had the white box stuff. Yeah.
I wanted to pick really quickly on, it was interesting that a lot of us are coming at designing monsters from very different directions, right? Like I heard Elise talking about sort of having an overarching theme at first, right? I'm thinking ancient Greece, so let me think of the mythology of that period and the gods and etc. Where Kerry's talking about a more mechanical approach of, well, have this specific challenge level that I need to fulfill, and what monsters fit in that spectrum. Does anybody else have a different, like another angle that they're coming at monster design with, or a different initial instigator of why you might need a custom monster?
I tend to look at my monsters because when I play, I tend to be more of a storyteller DM. And so I usually come from either similar to Elise, where it's like, okay, well, what is the story here? What is the history of this place? What is the lore? But also the environment, and especially specifically, you know, I'm a cartographer by trade. So a lot of that really dictates how my monsters are going to come to life. And I don't actually like using non-custom monsters in my own games, just because like you said, you know, people who have been playing for a while, they will recognize them. They will be like, oh yeah, that's that thing. I know what it does. And I don't really want that. I want them to be like, oh, you know, it's this magical thing, and you know, we're in this world we've never seen before. So I think it's more interesting and important, at least for me personally, to look at it from kind of like that type of perspective, and, you know, take the environments and think about how these environments affected these creatures and why would they be attacking or maybe not attacking, what they would look like and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to come from that sort of like ecological vantage point, right? Of like, you know, what is this place and why is it here? So what might live here and what do they need and what do they feed off of? You know, or when you were talking about story, one of the things I always think of when I think of monsters is, can my players talk to this monster, right? Is this just a thing for them to kill, or is it possible that they're going to have a conversation with it? And now I got to think of its backstory and its, you know, its motivations. And honestly, those are some of the most interesting monsters, right?
Yeah, those are my favorite to use as a DM and also to write Yeah, I don't like some of the monsters. Like, they're very scary. These are scary creatures here, and they just want to kill everyone, or they want to win and take over things. So it's sometimes a little harsh. So I do like to give them a weird, like a quirky personality, or some little trait that can at least be a little funny, even while they're spewing evil. They're still a little bit funny, and yeah, as writing it, I will always kind of put that in the like the forefront of my head as I'm designing it, especially a new creature. And then the mechanics are just kind of, they're there, and then pick one, especially if it's like a legendary creature, you can, pick one really special thing and go from there with it.
Awesome. Hey,
Sorry,
go ahead, Kerry.
I think, I think probably, well, I don't want to necessarily put words in everybody's mouth, but it sounds like we're all on the same page in this respect, that your custom monsters, unless you're writing a monster manual, right, where you're just, these monsters aren't standalone. They're part of this adventure you're writing. So, you work in parts of the environment or part of the story. There's a reason for them to be there. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the creation process. Unless, like I say, you really are just trying to make a stat block, and even then that can be tough, where you're trying to fill in some background so it's more generic, but yet still has flavor. But yeah, I think generally when you're creating custom, you're doing it for a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. For a theme, for a plot, for the adventure. There's something interesting and unique for this adventure that you're taking people on, the story that you're telling.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kerry, because for me it takes a lot of time and energy to do the kind of when you're doing fresh mechanics and stuff for these monsters. So I definitely only put them in if they're integral, to the storyline or to the theme. So I definitely with that, Kerry.
Out of curiosity, has anyone done a more sort of just monster manual or compendium or index of monsters? Has anyone worked on that kind of stuff?
I plan to.
Yeah, awesome.
I haven't yet, but Volume 3 of the Feywild series I'm doing through the Veil will be a monster vault. So
interesting. So how do you go? How do you go about that? That sounds way harder to me. I feel like when you're designing an adventure, you sort of know the needs of the adventure, and that's going to feed what kind of monsters you need.
When it comes to setting up a volume, and I haven't started production for this one yet, but we got to have templates. We got to have, I know Kerry's seen this and Drew's seen this. So for Volume 2, we're going to have a little more story that goes with our monsters than say the monster manual, because we want seeds for the DM to kind of this is a great little storyline I can add to my campaign and have going on. And it's a lot of technical work, I guess, behind the scenes. It's I got to get, all these guidelines put together and updated. And after each volume, I like to take in feedback from everyone, what worked, what didn't work. So I guess we'll find out once production, I'll probably have a better answer once production starts and gets rolling on Volume 3. So, but we'll definitely have to, hey, Feywild, we got to stick with the theme, something from CR0 to here, a little bit of everything. So
yeah, I'm working on a community project called Talia's Tome of Tables, and so we have all these reference tables. Elise is on it, actually. We have, it's not really custom monsters, but it's villains. It kind of counts, right? But it's basically a bunch of it's Talia is this interdimensional traveler that writes everything down, and so these tables are what she saw in her travels, and so these are the villains that she's experienced at some point.
That sounds interesting. Yeah, and
think,
I'm on a project.
Sorry, Drew.
Oh, sorry. Why do you go?
No, you go.
Okay. Well, you said villains. That remind me, I'm on a new project that's going to be not for DMs Guild, but it's using the OGL for a Kickstarter called Supers and Sorcery, and it's going to be like a medieval superheroes setting. And I'm working on writing villains, like the supervillains. So we're taking all the legendary creatures and making them supervillains in this world. So that's going to be really, really fun to try to like subvert those into something totally new.
Awesome. So my next sort of canned question here that I'd love to ask folks is well, how do we go about it? Once you're at that point, you know you need a custom monster. Where do you start?
I think I start with like story themes. So I build like, what do they look like? Where are they at? What's their background? If I'm, basing off mythology or existing creature, I'm thinking about like their physicality. Like, all right, if it's a monster of ancient Greece that has a ton of arms, maybe they're gonna be using those arms to throw things, to pick things up, to lift people up off the ground. Maybe that impacts their strength stats, for example. So I usually deal with like mechanics at the back end, and at the beginning, I really start with kind of like the backbone story and kind of like their physicality and what they're capable of doing before I start jumping into mechanics.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with that. And back to what you were saying, Paul, earlier about particularly ecology, I think the first thing I start with is what's their purpose and what do they need? Why are they here? How do they live? What are their motivations and desires? And what do they need to actually survive in this environment that they are here for? Is it their environment? Is this where they evolved, or is this where they've come for a particular reason? And I think once you sort of nail down what you're trying to achieve, you then start building the mechanics on the back of that. And very much like what Elise was saying, I mean, prime example is if you pick a location, say, the Underdark. All right, well, the first thing you have to think of is, well, how do they see? It's dark down there. It doesn't have dark vision. If it doesn't have dark vision, which would be very unusual for an Underdark monster, what's the alternative? Are they trapped in an area that has, bioluminescent fungi, for example? Okay, well, how does that then match in with them, and so forth? And I think the rest of it just kind of fills in behind. I think also, though, there's a point where you have to go, what do you actually want it to do? As much as it's nice to know what its desires are and what its motivations are and where it's come from, is what do you want it to do? What purpose does it have in the adventure? Is it to, specifically challenge the players, or does it have something else that it's trying to achieve? Do you want, and it can be as simple as, well, what I really like is a two-headed monster that breathes two different types of energy. Okay, well, that's a reasonable place to start from as well. And you go, well, okay, well, how does that affect its physiology, and what does it need? And if it breathes fire, is it then immune to fire, or is it resistant to fire? Can it hurt itself? Some creatures that have venom, for example, are immune to their own venom. Some are not. Scorpions not immune to their own venom. So, all these kind of little bits and pieces, it kind of sort of trees off into this, branching network of bits and pieces. And then when I finally get my thoughts together, I write it all down and then put it in a stat block.
I do like getting little bits of inspiration, like you mentioned the scorpion, getting little pieces from real life animals or plants or something, and just going really deep into researching things I never thought I'd be looking up, but everything is just so interesting. And then just somehow using that one little nugget of information and expanding on a whole big thing.
Yes, DMs.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make an aside comment. As a writer, does anyone else feel like we're all on like watch lists somewhere for the weird stuff we look up?
That's what I was going to say, is that all of our search histories are real weird.
Yeah, for sure.
When I saw what the news was saying that they can now search our search histories without a warrant or whatever, I was like, I had just finished looking up severed limbs the other day for painting.
Or like, what does acidic water smell like? Just weird stuff, yes.
I literally had to look up a dead body that's missing a leg. Like it's very specific because it was for an adventure and I was drawing it, and so it's real weird.
At least you said you had to look it up, as opposed to you had to go out the back and have a look at the one you got.
I guess that's better.
Don't judge me. Don't judge me.
Micah, you were talking about.
Sorry, Paul. We're getting a bit off subject here.
No, it's all good. It's all good. You were talking about going down weird alleys, and one of the things I found is, like, especially when I'm considering ecology of the overall environment, the dungeon or the whatever it is, the part of the adventure that I'm filling out, is that then I'll go down these weird alleys of. Okay, it doesn't have dark vision, so how does it see? Oh, there's bioluminescent moss. Well, where does that moss come from? What does the moss need, right? And then, one thing leads to another, and now I'm down this, third or fourth tier creature and made all these bizarro things. I don't know. I feel like, creativity loves constraints, right? Like you go down that alleyway.
I think that's the fun of being a creator, though, Paul. I mean, especially when you start going down there, what does the bioluminescent fungi need? Well, suddenly you're actually building on your adventure and your ecology and your location, and then it's, well, what else is there? And I mean, again, for I guess for people like us and probably most people, actually watching the stream that have an interest in this is, this is how we think, and this is how we create, and this is how you get new ideas, and they expand from being just a set of stats to something that you can bring to life at a table. If you actually do have it, in relation to its environment, and then its environment and things in that environment in relation to it really brings it to life for people at the table. It's not just, oh, it's got claws and fangs and it's angry. That depth does come through when you present those monsters, and I think that helps us suspend our disbelief and give us a good gaming experience. So it's I think, and again, like Kerry said, I won't speak for everyone on the channel, but I think it's part and parcel of being a creator that you want to add those little details, that you want to do your research and end up on a watch list where you do have those little nuances that the players will pick up on, and that they'll also pick up on if you've just thrown some stats together. You get found out pretty quickly if you've just gone, oh yeah, it's 4 attacks with 3 claws and a tail and an eyeball or whatever. They're gonna know. They're gonna pick it up pretty quickly. They're gonna know you don't have confidence in that monster.
Story and everything is important. Don't get, but following along that. We're kind of speaking real serious about it, but the other thing to think of is it's a game, and sometimes we just make things that are fun to play. This monster, he can bounce off walls, so he like ricochets around. That doesn't make sense naturally. It doesn't really make sense magically, honestly, but that does sound kind of like a fun thing to have to fight.
Yep. Good point.
All right. Does anybody have any advice for then how to get into the numbers, right? So we know we want an Underdark creature that doesn't have dark vision, that feeds off of bioluminescent moss. How do I stat it?
The simplest way is to just reskin something. I've had these technology mixed Borg things. I was doing a Barrier Peaks kind of thing. And I had this thing, it had syringes for fingers and could inject like a drug into you and could jump around real quick. It was a ghoul. I just described it different. And it didn't have a bite attack, but it was a ghoul, and the guys never realized it, and it worked out great. And I needed it at that time. So that's the possibly the simplest right there. Is just change a description, but all the effects are basically the same.
Yeah, or mix them up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. I talk a lot.
No, or even, even mix them up. Take a couple of different ones and combine them from the same CR and stuff like that. Yeah, that's what I usually do.
I take the long route. I take the scenic tour. I use the monster building stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I usually stick to it, but sometimes I kind of like I'll move over this way on something if I'm taken away down here. Playtesting is huge. Playtest. So you know, run the adventure a few times with folks, throw that monster in, and at the end be like, oh, and tell folks like, hey, we're playtesting this. Like, what's your honest opinion about it? That's super important. It's time consuming, but I don't know. It's also really rewarding to like build something that's from scratch. But I still look at other things in 5e to be like to make sure something with similar stats. It's kind of fitting within the bumpers, I guess, of 5e at the same time. But I sometimes break the rules. So.
And also, I think is an.
Go ahead, Domille.
I keep talking over people.
That's
sorry.
The internet. It's is what it is.
I think there's an important distinction between creating custom monsters professionally for an adventure or a thing that you're publishing, and running your own game. So it's if we're working on an adventure, of course we're gonna go the long road and do all of the things for it that are needed. But having just DM'd my game a couple of days ago, that's where my mindset was.
Yeah, I think, Domille, I mean, I've used the technique you talk about quite a bit, right? Whereas I'm like, well, these are undead gnolls, but they torture their victims and they gain power through that. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like how a vampire survives. So let me go look up vampire stats and what can I steal from a vampire. But they're kind of like gnolls, so let me look at gnolls too, and let me mix in a little of that. And yeah, I definitely feel like I'm pitching a TV show when I'm building a monster. It's just like vampires, but it's vampires meets gnolls, and yeah. I think it's a great way to go about building monsters.
Yeah, the more you read it and you see the different monsters and pay attention to like the CR, the tier level where they're, slotted in, you kind of see some of the same abilities. So it's almost like a player level, or if you're building, leveling up your own character, or if you're trying to develop a subclass or something where, at a certain level, they should probably be able to do this, and higher tier monsters, they should, maybe have a multi-attack, or they should have higher hit points, or, something that they should just have at that point, or else it's not going to work.
There's definitely certain abilities at certain levels that monsters should or shouldn't have. It comes down to player resources as well. Like you don't want low-level monsters with too many abilities that are, save or die or save or suck. Right? Basically, an ability that, ghouls are probably the exception. But where if you don't make your save, you're out for the fight, because that's not fun for anyone, and the players don't have the resources to combat that kind of ability. But while we're actually something was just mentioned about CR, and I think there's probably one thing to mention, I guess, and that's that CR is one of those weird things where it's more art than science. It gives you a general idea of what a monster can do and about how powerful characters should be to take it on. But I mean, in my experience, what I've noticed is I say, but in the monster manual, there are things in there that are woefully underpowered for their CR or woefully overpowered. The one that I always come back to is the Intellect Devourer, a very low CR monster, very, very capable of annihilating a party very quickly with some luck one way or the other. And so it's definitely, I mean, as Elise was saying, I mean, if you're going to make a monster, you especially if you're going to start mixing and matching from other monsters or even from scratch, you need to make sure that it fits the bill. And the bill is it a challenge without being, overpowering? Have I done something? Have I either made something from scratch, or have I added two powers together, which from other monsters, which cause a corner case where there's just no beating this thing, or under certain circumstances. And it's tough because you know, CRs are based on like averages, I guess, at best. And you know, I've played in groups where, you know, you literally, you know, you got 5 players, they all know their stuff, they've optimized their characters, particularly when it comes to things like Adventurers League and so forth. Generally, people play with fairly optimal characters. On the other hand, I've sat down at tables where, you know, it's, you know, someone wants to play a, you know, a miniature, you know, teddy bear from the, you know, the ethereal plane or something. You know, they all have these weird and wonderful ideas that are horribly unoptimized, but a lot of fun to play. And of course, as DM, you absolutely want to let them do that, but you then look at your monsters or your adventure and you just go, wow, you know, I've played in parties where there's like no characters with a strength above 10, and there's a gelatinous cube in the dungeon. And gelatinous cubes, if you get caught in it, you need to make a strength saving throw to get out. Nobody's getting out. You know, and it can literally be as simple as that. So you do need to take care with not only when you build a monster, but also when you select the monster and what it's going up against. Because the coolest monster in the world is great, but if it you know, dies in the first round because you've got all these weird and wonderful powers, but it's only got, you know, it's got less hit points than the party averagely can produce in damage in a single round, no one's going to see all the wonderful things it does. And vice versa, if you create a monster that's, you know, fantastic, but it just happens to prey on the particular weakness you've got in that group, nobody's going to be happy. No one's going to enjoy your monster. They're all going to be dissolving in the gelatinous cube, staring at you from across the table. You know, what a mean DM you are. Or, you know, in their video screens or what have you. You know, all the screens suddenly go blank as people just log off, rage log.
Yeah, that's a big difference if you're creating the monster for your own home game, or if you are writing, you know, doing it for something that you're going to write and plan to publish. Because if that's why the playtesting is really so important. You'll find out right away those little things. And if you're DMing you can just, oh, you know what? He's dead. No, he's not. He has 20 more points. So let's keep going.
Yeah, and the guidelines in the DMG is pretty good, but you got to think of them not as rules, but as guidelines. You know, like Micah was saying, it's an art there that kind of gets you toward the end, and maybe it worked out. Maybe it's perfect. Hey, the rules or whatever, you know, all the calculations worked out and it worked great. Or you're like, no, once you start playing it, you're like, no, we're going to tweak it up or down or do something, right?
It sounds like we're all big believers in playtesting, which I totally support. I think that's 100% right. I'm kind of curious if anyone's got any crazy horror stories of a playtest where they discovered something really surprising, like way underpowered or way overpowered or anything like that. Anybody got a wild playtest gone awry?
Not wild.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm just talking over Domille there. Sorry, Domille, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just quickly say that we, so last Halloween, actually had a collab with another creator, and we created a stat block for this creature that's like pumpkin combined with a spider. And then I gave it to one of the guys that was DMing for us, and I don't remember what level it was. We were, but he used like one of those spider things and nearly killed all of us, which I did not expect. I don't think it was meant to be so overpowered. Maybe he was doing something wrong. But boy, was I surprised by my own creation.
I produced a series of adventures that's actually still going. I'm trying to finish it this year, and I produced it through Kickstarter, and I used both the Pathfinder 1 rules. This is before Pathfinder 2 was thought of, and the D&D rules, and I was basically doing a sort of a cross convert. I was writing it as I went, but also, you know, basically in both systems. And I got caught out actually on a very, very small thing that I didn't even bother to look at, which was I had a setup basically where these fire giants have taken over this town, this mining town, and expanded their smelting and processing complex and gone underground with it, and actually gone to, you know, like the magma table, and so the very bottom levels got, you know, all cool rivers of lava and, you know, things that are, you know, logically impossible but still make a really cool adventure. And the difference in the systems, and Drew, you might be interested in this with giants, is giants are much larger in D&D than they are in Pathfinder. And when I put the map down, I'd actually written it first in Pathfinder. Well, the map was drawn around the Pathfinder rules, and then I went to playtest it in 5th edition, and my fire giant got stuck in the corridor because some smart player went, "That corridor is too small for that giant. He's now squeezing," and I went, "Okay, he's squeezing," and oh no, right? So this poor giant's like crammed into this tiny little corridor, like half his size, right? Which in Pathfinder is the perfect size for them, but in D&D they're way too big. And they just annihilate. This thing was supposed to be like a lieutenant fight, like a really hard fight. But because the giant couldn't move, they boxed him in. His disadvantage, their advantage, they just wiped him out. And I'm just like, wow, did not see that coming.
So what did you do for that in that product? Did you end up increasing the size of the passageway, or do you have to write 2 different maps?
No, so basically what I did was I pretty much just moved the giant and went, you know what, you know, because there were a couple of entrances. So there's this stairwell / corridor that we're in was like an access point, and was actually meant to be used by the more minion type monsters. You know, I think there's ogres and azes in there as well. So the flaming dwarf type creatures.
Yep.
And there was there's a huge lift on the other side, which basically brings goods up and down. So I pretty much just hand waved and went, you know what, the giants just use the lift. They're too lazy to take the stairs. So that's it.
Excellent.
I did a playtest. This is for an Adventures League CCC that was for a convention that should have happened March 13th. So it was one of the first conventions that got canceled. Like, it got canceled the day before with all the shutdowns. I've done a little bit of, really the convention is the playtest, you know. It gets ran every day and everyone gets their feedback. So we really only had a little bit of playtesting, and the group that I had was my normal gaming group. So they'll just make up they like to create new characters for the playtest. And so whatever combination they picked of new subclasses, and it was like the exact perfect puzzle. I feel like they solved what the final boss battle could do. And they just solved like the puzzle of this combat immediately with like, oh, someone can fly and be immune to necrotic damage, so they can pick up the thing and protect everyone else, and someone else can turn into a giant constrictor snake and just hold them down. And so it went really, it started out very, very hard, and then they figured it out, and then it was like that. They just, like the giant in the corridor, they just pummeled them.
Yeah, I feel like pacing is far more what I'm playtesting than actual difficulty. I can definitely think of a playtest I ran where they got through it an hour faster than I was expecting. And so I was like, I guess it's improv time for the next hour. Here we go. What can I put in front of you now?
To go back to Drew's story a little bit, his description of that playtest doesn't mean anything was wrong about any of his setup or anything. I mean, that's the other thing. Sometimes the players all roll 20s and you roll 1s, and it just happens. Yep. And and that's you got to look at playtests that way too, to go, oh yeah, that just wasn't a good playtest for that. We had fun, which is good. If you can still have fun when things hit the edges, that's still great, right? But sometimes things are just optimal in different ways, and it's not even related to the monster you created.
Yeah, and one game is just one data point, right? Like that's probably you should probably adjust nothing after one game because you need more data, I think.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, I also do multiple playtests because I've had people like poof a dragon, like, oh, it's polymorphed into a worm, and we dropped it off in the ethereal plane, and then like another party had to do like the full fight, and oh yeah.
Yeah, I certainly
That's
go
all
through
good
like multiple
good.
tiers of playtesting, right? Like my friends get the most raw. Sorry, friends, you get like the worst version of the design because you're my first go-to, and then I'll bring it to conventions, and then push it out from there.
I haven't had I mean, I've definitely had to tweak things after a playtest. I haven't had any that like, oh no, I got to totally rework this whole monster. But I do have an adventure that has a Oni ghost, an ogre mage ghost in it. So he's both the ogre mage and a ghost, and it's made for 3rd level. And the first fight in there, I mean, I explicitly state, and you got to talk to your players a little bit beforehand, but the intent is to go all out. You don't want the players wasting their resources. You're supposed to take them down in 1 or 2 turns. And that's kind of fun, actually. You never get to do that as a DM, just to go, I'm going to lay waste to them. Boom. Because the next part of the adventure is the PCs are so close to death, they actually become spirits and can then fight the ghost. So it's a ghost that actually changes CRs. It's like a CR 7 or 8 as a ghost. And then if the other guys are ghosts, then they can fight a ghost, and it comes down to a CR 4, right?
Cool.
Yeah, so that was a fun little one to do, and it's a very short little adventure. But it's curious in that way. It almost seems broken because, like I say, you wipe them out in 1 or 2 rounds. Every playtest I did, I took them out fast. But you don't want them to waste their stuff because they're going to need their spells and things as ghosts.
I saw a good question in the chat from Robert Morris Jr. about how do you get your playtesters to open up and actually give you some valuable information after it's done, even if you have a good survey and ask questions. If they're just like, oh, it was cool, any ideas there?
I usually a lot of my playtesters have come from the community, actually. So in the beginning, I used to playtest stuff with my D&D group, but I got much better feedback from like folks in the community when you're like, hey, I'm looking for some playtesters, I'll cite you guys, give you a free copy, blah, blah, blah. Because they know they're coming in to playtest. And I have a fabulous, awesome group of people at the Red Knight Inn who playtest stuff, and we help other people playtest. And, like people will put stuff in chat or they'll PM you. You're like, hey, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it in chat, send me a PM. So for me, that's been a really good approach so far. So, and like the feedback's like a gold mine. Like it's helped me a lot.
Yeah, look, I think Lisa's hit it on the head. When you ask a random person, I guess, or you just play in a group and you go, all right, guys, give me some feedback. When people aren't expecting that, I think they're not really sure what you're asking for, or how to give constructive feedback. Oh, it was great, they say. I mean, that's useless, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great they had a good time, but it's useless feedback information. And so I think you kind of have to prime them a little bit. A good survey is a start. Refining it as you go through your playtest is important. So if 2 or 3 playtest groups or however many start to show a pattern, then you can start to ask questions about those specific things. I think offering a little bit of insight yourself is good in terms of the kind of answers that you want. You say to them, well, was it easy to hit? Was it hard to hit? And a lot of that has to do with the obviously the roll of the dice, but did you find this power difficult to deal with, or does it work with this, or whatnot? I mean, a lot of the stuff you can see for yourself when you're running it, but especially if you farm out your playtest to other groups where you're not directly involved, you do need to make sure that they're cognizant of what you're really looking for. I mean, it's great to get an endorsement. Oh, this was fantastic, I really enjoyed it. I mean, that tells you that it's a good game, but it doesn't tell you where the mechanical strengths and weaknesses lie. And again, I think in a lot of cases, you do need playtesters that understand, at least in some respects, the mechanics. If a player's just wants to enjoy the experience, and then they don't delve too deeply into the mechanics side of things, that's how they enjoy the game, and that's great. But they don't necessarily make a great playtester. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I feel like having questions is like the most important thing, right? Like even before you get your playtesters in front of you, you should know what questions you're trying to answer, right?
Yeah, and I think
otherwise
you can give them the questions up front and let them read them before you start, and let them think about it as they're going, or fill it out, pen and paper as they're sitting there, write their own notes. That way they'll have better feedback at the end.
If you're doing it in person, there was one I did, my last play test, that I actually pulled in stuff from work, which is not normally something you want to admit, but they have these things called retrospectives, where you get everybody around and you start going, okay, what happened this period of work we did, what do you have to say? And you have the same problem where nobody wants to talk. Nobody wants to bring up things. And what I did was, well, basically it's called a 3 Little Pig retrospective, which sounds really stupid, but it works actually. You say, okay, you got a house of straw, a house of wood, and a house of bricks. And everybody knows, the straw one was terrible. The one was okay, but it didn't last. And the brick one is what you really like. And you give out sticky notes and you go, okay, I want from each of you at least one sticky note. You can put it under whichever category you want, and either say something that went really well, say something that was okay but probably needs work, or say something that you just hated. And just that way you're making people, even if they just go, it was okay, that's a fine comment to say I had a good time. But by encouraging everyone to at least give one opinion, you'll find that they tend to add on. Or after it's done, you start discussing it, going, okay, well, here's this. And then that makes somebody else go, oh, yeah, I kind of like that too. Or I have the exact opposite feeling, and here's why. You get more of a feedback. But that's a thing you got to do in person. If it's remote or something you hand it off, I mean, you're stuck with forms and things. I don't know. But and that at least is one way I think you could actually do it, because conversation, I think, is where you're going to get your best feedback. If people will, because questions, you may accidentally divert into certain areas, and not even realize that this one piece over here really didn't work that well, but your questions don't really match up. So if you can get people to volunteer information, that's where you're getting some real valuable stuff. But it is hard. It's hard to do.
A really cool idea. I'll try that sometime.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's a nice, simple premise that allows people to be free to make comments under that thing. Because no one wants to tell you your stuff is bad, right? No one wants to say, oh, sorry, Micah, but that was awful. Unless they really don't like you, but and so they're cognizant. I find with my feedback, they're cognizant of your feelings as well. You've put a lot of work into this. They see that. They want it to be good for you. But really, as designers, what we need genuine criticism, and criticism isn't personal. Nothing worthwhile was done right the first time. You need to get that honest feedback. If something's not working, it's not working. And being able to break down that I guess that kind of social tension of people don't like to say bad things to your face, putting it in categories like that and going, well, give me a straw house. That analogy makes them feel a bit freer to be a bit more honest, I think. Because it's not, they're playing a game. They're not telling you, Micah, that was awful. So, I like it. I think I'll start using that, actually. That's really good.
Well, I've even considered doing it just, regular play games where I'm not play testing anything. I'm just running. Tell me how did this go? This little arc we just finished, or, we've played 3 sessions now. What do you guys think? What's happening around that sucks? Just to get that discussed. I think that kind of feedback's good, whether you're writing something for DMs Guild or just playing a game and you want to make sure everybody's having a good time and that you're hitting the bases for everybody.
I couldn't disagree more. I'm a massive egomaniac. I want everyone to tell me how wonderful I was.
We all have to love your gelatinous cubes. That's what I'm hearing.
That's right.
All hail the cubes.
I don't know about you guys, but I've run a lot of this stuff at conventions, and one of the problems there is often you're running the game right up till the end of your time slot, and people are just going to pick up their stuff and go, and there's like no time to get any feedback at all. One of the things I've often done is like a mid-session check-in. Like usually you got a 4-hour slot, maybe 2 hours in, you say, okay, well, let's take 5 minutes because probably everyone needs to go to the bathroom. And at that point, I'll say, what have you really liked so far? What did you not like so far? What are you hoping to see in the second half of the game?
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really helpful.
I've done a lot of convention play, and you can get some really good comments from, because they're strangers. They don't know you, right? But usually the guy who stays after the game and y'all chat is usually the guy who had a really good time. So, it's kind of skewed.
Yep. Does anybody else have any other ideas of like, especially when the time of the game is constrained about how to get good feedback? Does anybody do anything asynchronous, I guess? Anybody ever like, here's a form to fill out? Nobody's going to fill out a form. Why did I even say that? I'm grasping.
I think a mid-game form would probably destroy the suspension of disbelief.
If that form walks away from the table, you've lost it.
Well, actually, what you need is you need to write an adventure where there's a level of bureaucracy in the middle. So perhaps with all of these hell-based adventures coming out now, we need to incorporate to some of our things. The bureaucracy of hell, filling out forms. Well, that's part of the adventure. I'd love to actually create an infernal prison or something where halfway through it's like, please rate your experience in our prison. Did you like the flaming leeches of death? Did you enjoy the scalding baths of rejuvenating acid?
That game already exists.
It's
called Paranoia.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, right? That'd be perfect for a Paranoia game. Halfway through, all right, we're gonna stop for a minute and do a peer review, everyone.
A little elevator music.
And that's the only game I've had somebody rage quit in the middle of a con game.
Oh no.
He didn't quite get it. He thought everybody was picking on him. You can't be sensitive in Paranoia.
Well, I mean, yeah. So Paranoia was working.
Well, and the thing is, if you start getting an attitude about it, then everybody decides they're going to come after you.
Yeah. All right, so we're nearing the end of the hour, so I just want to encourage anybody who's in the chat who has any burning questions, please feel free to pop them in there, and I'll get them on screen and get your burning questions about custom monster design answered. I'm gonna quick look at my list here and see if there's anything that we haven't covered. We've been pretty good at hitting all the stuff that I had written down ahead of this. I guess, does anybody feel like when you're producing a work that you're going to publish, do you feel like there's any minimums or maximums in terms of how much of the page count you're going to devote to custom monsters?
I put in what I need.
Yeah.
In the end, it comes down to what the adventure calls for, and what you're relying on to make it all work. I mean, sometimes you'll have no custom monsters, and sometimes you'll have nothing but custom monsters. And I think that just comes down to what the concept is and what you're trying to achieve with it.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. Because it's very dependent on like the story and what you're trying to put out on stage for everyone. And sometimes stuff just doesn't fit in that neat, pretty, perfect, half-page catalog. So that's fine.
So Elise, so your answer there makes me a little curious, because you've actually worked on print projects, right? All of my stuff's electronic, so page stuff doesn't matter. People can search or whatever. So you haven't come upon any, limitations as far as page count with worrying about the printing process or any of that stuff?
Oh, that's a great question. So far, I've been lucky. Everything fits on one page, and a big thing that helps with that is having text fill art. And what's good about having artists on the team, so depending on like stock art, like if you have something special you need to get made, you can always like request what you need. I haven't run into anything where it's all like we have like a full page and then it's like going on to the, that could become an issue with the monster book that we have coming up. So I think, again, I'm not a professional at layout. Usually I have layout folks on this, but I think like effective use of art is helpful. And we may have to get creative. So, yeah.
I think also in that process, editing helps as well. I mean, stat blocks are going to vary in size based on how complex your monster is. I've noticed, like when I'm doing layout on some of my projects, you will end up in a standard 2-column format. Occasionally, the stat block will be too big to either fit one whole column, or you know, often you'll do like the dual column spread across the page, and you'll end up with some weird spacing. But if often you can either remove or fill space by adding in those little bits and pieces, those ecologies, those even things like tactics or mindset or things like that. You can always add a little bit of information that fills in those spaces. As Lisa said, the good use of art. You know, I mean, the big thing, Kerry, is, as you were sort of saying with print, is you never really want to leave blank spaces. I think it's a little bit more forgivable in electronic because I don't think, this is my personal feel, but I feel like if you run across an electronic document that has a little bit of spaces left here and there, I think you just kind of, you know, you naturally tune that out and scroll on. But I find it really jarring when I look into a physical book to see white space. And I feel like something should always be there. So I tend to just, you know, I mean, as evidenced by this podcast, or sorry, this live stream, I'm not short of a word. I can always find more words to fill space. I have a lot of trouble cutting things down. And I can tell you a good editor is an absolute blessing when it comes to that, because they will take your waffle and they will just go, no, it's gone. And you might shed a little bit of tear because that was a wonderful description or an amazing insight into the motivation of your monster that you really thought should be there. But as a creator, sometimes you have to let things go.
Oh, I have that trouble. My drafts always start much bigger than they're going to end. I'm always way more verbose. My English, I'm usually fairly decent writing, but yeah, I got to tighten it up usually. So I got to do a couple of passes and then, you know, sentences get shorter. You know, I get excited when I can figure out, hey, wow, I can turn this into one word. You know?
Yeah, editors are a must. Like anyone out there doing projects, have one or two editors. Like I know, like for volume 2, like editing was at first not our strong suit for volume 1. So volume 2, we did peer review. So everyone who wrote, you're looking at other people's stuff. Then we did edit a couple rounds with your editor, and then we added a new feature, which is consistency editing, which we ended up doing at the end of volume 1 as well. So editing's super important, and it really cleans up your work, especially if you're headed to print. So definitely.
Yeah, I thought the peer reviews was really a good touch on that volume.
So
So
yeah,
here's a somewhat
a monster, you know, and something gets cut. You know, nothing's ever gone. You know, that's just, you save that idea for the next thing. And with the monster, you don't want your one monster to have too many abilities. They only get one action, you know? So, and you don't want it, especially if it's on the page, if you're going to publish it, you don't want this, you know, kind of CR3 type monster to look like it has more going on than Tiamat on the page, because the person running it is just going to like, no, I'm not doing all that. So yeah. With monsters, you can cut them up and, you know, maybe make one big monster idea you had, and that's 3 separate things, and now they're a team, and now they, you know, it's more interesting.
So here's a somewhat related question from a viewer here. Do you follow sort of standardized WotC formats for stat blocks, or is there a different approach? How do you guys like to format up your characters or your monsters?
Again, I don't want to speak for everybody. on here, but we're all DMs Guild writers, and I think particularly for DMs Guild, there is they do have a style guide and a standard. I think there's a level of professional sort of synchronicity you want with the official materials. So my stat blocks are not always identical, but very similar. I try to stick with it unless I look at a stat block and there is perhaps something not quite right about it, or I've done something that hasn't really got an analog. But in my early days, I was just like, oh, no, I'm going to have my own style, and throw it all together like a horrible salad. And yeah, look, in the end, I think they put a lot of work into making these things readable, understandable, and especially people playing the game that have their own monster manual and so forth. People get used to a certain look of things. They expect to see the sensors are, where they are. They're below the physical stats. They're, above the abilities. That's where they're going to look for them. And if you try and go too far off book, I think you're just going to confuse people. So my take on it is basically there is a standard, and that standard's, it doesn't hurt you to use that standard, and it might hurt you to not use that standard. It might make your monster more unplayable.
Yeah, it just makes things simpler, easier, faster. You already have a standard to go with, so yeah.
Yeah, I think starting out, I've done a lot of like collaborative projects, and folks had like their own templates, their own things going on. So like for my own projects at first, I maybe didn't stick to it as much as I should have, but now I'm steering more toward like following Wizards of the Coast style as much as possible. Because if you end up, falling into an industry gig or something like that, that is a really good tool to have in your tool belt. If you get on like bigger projects. And Micah's right, like folks are used to a certain look and feel for your stuff. So yeah, get to know the Chicago writing style and the style guides as much as possible, especially if you're starting out.
Yeah, basically I'm in agreement with all that. The thing to remember we're all writing on DMs Guild. We're putting stuff out there. We want people to use it. And it's nice to sell stuff too. And you think about the customer, you're thinking about the target when you're writing this stuff, right? I'm not writing this stuff for me. I'm writing it for the person who doesn't know me, who just sees it and thinks it might be fun. So it's like if somebody's ordering a milkshake, I got to give them a milkshake. Now there's all kinds of flavors, and maybe they need a strawberry. So, I can tweak things. And I think we also probably all play with that. I don't know. I bet every one of my products I've got out is the format slightly changes. Not horribly so. Heck, most people probably wouldn't even notice. I notice because I'll flip through it and go, oh yeah, that's where I did that. You're learning stuff constantly. You're learning things about layout, how this goes, how that goes, and you're always trying to improve. And so you're willing to try things. And in some ways, that's also, I think, one of the benefits you get from DMs Guild. You've got people we aren't stuck in a certain structure for things like the WotC is as a publisher. They have a certain, this is the rails we got to stay within. Whereas we're allowed a lot more latitude on DMs Guild to try stuff, whether that's in themes or, where, I love flumps. I'm just going to make a flump adventure. You're never going to find that from WotC, but, or custom monsters that, like I say earlier, ricochet off walls or what have you, we're allowed to experiment. But I think, we do all keep it within some sort of confines. It's all D&D. It's all, you got to be able to read the numbers, and they need to be where they are. Because if they're not, that makes it harder for the DM. And anything that makes it harder for a DM is not going to sell, and honestly sucks. It's not, if you're draining fun, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be adding in fun. Let me get off the soapbox. Oh.
Drew, do you have anything to add there?
Oh yeah, no, just go with what's there, because it's all, even when you break down and you try to write a stat block on your own, if you're just on a blank Word document and you try to recreate what's on there, you'll see it's actually very technically sound. There's, little one 1/8 of an inch margin here, and you want this to be bold and italic, and then start the sentence. You don't just want bullet points and dashes. You want it to look as professional and as regular as possible, just so when someone's reading it, you're like, oh yeah, this looks legit.
I will add that at the beginning of the season on Wandering DMs, we had Ian McGarty on from Silver Boulet, and he had done some publications on DriveThruRPG, and had targeted 5e via OGL, and also done the same module on both for that and for Swords and Wizardry. And the funny thing was, I think he was also, again, when he was doing 5e compatible stuff, again, following the same stat block that we're talking about here, which is very standard, and I think is very wise when you're talking about the 5e audience. That's what they want, and you should absolutely give it to them. But it's verbose, right? It's a very verbose, it's a large chunk. So then when you take that out and say, okay, now I'm going to put in the tiny stat block you need for Swords and Wizardry in this case, they actually found it this sort of creative burst, because they went, look at all this space I have to fill now, to maintain the formatting of the document. And then they just went nuts and added a whole bunch of extra stuff to the Swords and Wizardry version, because they had all this extra space. Which I thought was very amusing.
I've actually seen some discussion, and I can't remember who it was, but I have seen some guys advocating an inline stack block. Like they used to have in early editions, you would not have a full monster manual entry in the adventure. You just have AC, hit points, how much damage we would do. Of course, those monsters were a lot simpler than they are now too. But I got to admit, it was an interesting thing. I've never done it, but just to say that idea is out there and people do play around with it. I haven't. It's kind of hard to do. It really is. Like Drew was saying, I mean, these guys, they did a pretty good job figuring out the format for this stuff. So when you're playing with it, you got to be sure that everybody has the info they need. But there are guys who are doing stuff like inline and things, and that seems kind of cool.
Interesting. Be curious to see it.
Just on that inline stat block, the biggest issue is the actual rules format. I mean, they're referring to a stat block style that was out in basic or in first edition, AD&D, where the monsters were very simple, as you said. And the truth is, if you go back and you look at those stat blocks, they include a lot of extraneous information you don't need for combat, things that just aren't necessary. Whereas if you look at the 5th edition stuff now, everything in that stat block is potentially useful in one format or another in that mechanical interaction. And so the only way I think you can realistically have an inline stat block with truncated statistics that works is if the monster has no abilities at all, or if you have a very experienced DM who knows the monster back and front. And I think most of the guys proposing that inline stat block are the guys that have played from early editions to late editions. I really hate the term system mastery because I think it's very elitist, but in some cases they're guys that are able to mentally deconstruct the mechanics because they have that level of knowledge and mental process to do. And so essentially what they're getting is a summary. They go, okay, well, the summary reminds me I know what the rest of it is. That's not really workable for most people. I've been playing a very long time, and even I would struggle to do that. I think if we're talking about giving people what like adding fun, I don't think that would add fun for most people. I think that would cause headaches. But that's that's a personal opinion, and that's not really what this forum is for. But I'll get off my soapbox now. But yeah, I think the standard format's pretty good. And as Paul said, it's going to change by rule set. I found when I was publishing for in the OGL and also Pathfinder, there is a big difference. Ironically, Pathfinder is actually smaller stat blocks for the most part, which is ironic considering just how bolt-on that system is. It's incredibly complex. Especially over the years, it's become more and more complex. I mean, in the end, they've basically had to shelve it and create a version 2 because version 1 is just out of control. And so, but I was finding when I did the convert over, I would have free space in the Pathfinder one that I didn't have in the D&D one. But the D&D one offers that layout where everything you need is there, and I think that's the strength of it. Even if you do end up with a big stat block, you can find everything you need. So, I'm not a big fan of changing up the format.
Yeah, and I think the latest stat blocks are really like accessible. Like it's really easy to find different kinds of content quickly based on like how it's laid out and the use of white space within those blocks compared to like some of the other games I've played. So
awesome.
Yeah, with
All right,
our latest big project. Oh, real quick, sorry, we did inline, but it was a whole stat block, but it was right like wherever it shows up in the adventure. So there was no appendix because we had 3 different adventures. So that was a decision we went back and forth on, and we went with that because I know as a DM, I don't like flipping pages. So it's like, it's on this page, and then you're going with it. So hopefully,
have you had much feedback about that, Drew?
Yeah, we had a couple people that, well, it's still pretty new. It's only about 2 weeks old. So not yet on that specifically. But I'm interested to see because...
Me too.
Yeah.
On that adventure, you didn't have multiple monsters of the same stat block at that point, right? You're saying they were each different, so you could put
yeah.
Because that would be my trouble. Is I tend to have minions running around, right? So then either you copy it everywhere or you.
Yeah, there wasn't too many different things. It was a lot of encounter based, so you might not see any, all of them. You might only roll a d8 and see one of them. So
yeah. That being the case, I mean, I totally would love it right there on the page. You're right. I'm with you on that.
Great. All right, next question. Here we go. What's everyone's opinion on character backgrounds for the DM to build on?
My game that I'm DMing right now, the entirety of the story is based on characters' backgrounds. Pretty much all of it. And they all intertwine and connect to each other. And actually the players are really, really, really into it right now. So I think it's working out really well.
I think anything you can do that ties the story and the game that you're running to what the players genuinely desire in their game is going to get more connection from them, more involvement. They're going to be more interested in delving into the story and making it work because it's, quite frankly, it's all about them, which it should be. I think there's a fine balance. I mean, some of you guys have talked about running, AL, triple Cs, running at cons. These are things you can't do that for. When it comes to things like publishing on the DMs Guild, you can't do that because you don't know what your target audience is going to be. You have to make it very broad. So I think for myself, I mean, most of the monsters I create, as in, put together mechanically, almost inevitably aren't going to fit that character background idea. But as a DM at home, absolutely. I always want to know if someone's bringing a character or changing characters, or even before we start out, session 0, what have you got for me? What's your character? What's their motivations? What do they want to do? Where have they come from? Who do they know? And absolutely tying all that in, and thematic monsters on thematic environments that have associated monsters to those characters, I think are critical for really giving your players the best experience.
It is an interesting, I've never done it, but having the question brought up, I think it could be interesting to say this monster, sailors grew up with the lore about blah, 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 sea monster. So this monster has one special frightening ability if you have a sailor background or something. That's different. I haven't seen that, but it's an interesting idea. I don't know how well it would work in play, but to me, that's an interesting concept.
Makes me think about Munchkin. They do that in Munchkin. It's kind of like a spoof on D&D, but it's
Yeah.
like only females can carry the sword, or only can be used by elves. So yeah, it'd be interesting to have like, yeah, this creature is always going to target the elf in the party if one is around. You know, I don't know. So or the paladin, or yeah, I don't know.
Actually, I actually think that's a really interesting idea. I think a lot of players do take advantage of the ability to make up custom backgrounds, but backgrounds exist and they exist for a reason. They're there to be part of that, semi-mechanics of a player. I mean, they're both tied to story and to the mechanics. So everyone in 5th edition is going to take a background of some sort, and putting together monsters that actually have additional effects based on the background. And it doesn't even have to be bad things. It doesn't have to be, if you're a sailor, you get worse stuff. It could be, well, as a sailor, you've heard these stories and you know a bit about this that others might not. And so you get this advantage, or, this whatever. I mean, you could really, I actually think it's an idea of merit. It's quite possibly someone on this chat should actually consider maybe exploring that for the DMs Guild, or one of the audience, or Kerry, it's his idea, or Domille, it's her idea, or I might just low-key steal it when people aren't looking.
Like a little tour guide pamphlet for each monster. Welcome to Chult. If you run into this guy or gal,
Or a monster that if faced against a noble, it bows first. So you get a free attack real quick.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because usually the backgrounds in the adventure, they might come up in the adventure hook section, like, why are you doing this? And then that's kind of it. So
yeah, I've never seen a monster that hooks like that. It's a curious thing.
got a cookie in your pocket, follows you around.
all right, let's do it. Us 5, let's write it. We'll just split up all the monster manuals. Each do 20% of them.
Thank you to
We'll do it for each.
who was that? Robert Morris Jr. Thank you. You've just given all the authors on this stream a new product. We appreciate it. We'll add you to the mentions. No royalties though.
Great. All right, I think we've got time for another one. Here's another question from the chat. Any personal ways you make a CR determination for a new creature? I know this is we touched on CR a little bit earlier. Anybody want to grab this one?
It depends. So am I making an adventure that's of a certain level of play, then I definitely have to have a certain level of creature that's in there. If I'm doing a manual, it's more of like a balance. Like we have to make sure we have enough creatures of this level and this level. We don't have any holes. Sorry about 5-year-olds in the background, so I'll pass it on to someone else. So
You're the one who mentioned cookies. This is your own fault.
Yeah.
you blame myself.
It's the magic summoning word. Summon small
Yeah,
child.
he's totally getting the cupcakes right now. I'm waiting for a Bahir to break in at any moment.
I mean, there's certainly
So I think
there's
for the-
math, right, in the Dungeon Master's Guide about how to determine CR for a creature. But I know there's also, I think we were talking before, right? It's fairly loose, right? There's a lot of interpretation that goes in there, and especially if you're inventing new abilities, maybe it gets even harder to figure out, well, what CR is this creature.
Yeah. And I think it helps to have other people just take a look at it. It's you don't have to like necessarily ask them to play test it, but anyone who knows the mechanics and the system really well, and have them just read it and ask them to see if they think, and they might think it's, they might just give you a feedback. Oh, this should be 1 up or 1 down, or it should have more hit point. Just something that you can just get. And then if you hear the same thing 5 times, you're like, okay, I guess it's good.
Yeah.
And
also, go ahead, Kerry.
well, I was just going to say I think the lower level CRs are a lot easier to get, to ping your target pretty easy with before any kind of play test, just to go, you just don't have that many powers. So it's a lot easier to go, yeah, I'm really right in that range. I mean, there's the variety really happens at higher levels when you start adding this combo with this and how that could impact things.
Yeah, an area
Yeah,
that's always kind
okay.
of that I've always kind of wondered about is like legendary actions and layer actions. When you start putting those things in there, like, you know, that's where I really started getting nervous of, is this balanced? Is this going to work? Am I going to TPK my party, or are they just going to waltz through here? But I think at that
I
point,
think the
it's
thing with
playtest,
legendary
right?
actions. Yeah, well,
Sorry,
that's
go on.
right. I think the thing with legendary actions is not to make them too powerful. In the end, I
Mm.
think it's easy to go, oh my god, you know, we could make it do this and we can make it do this, but they, you know, they're there to offset action economy. They're there to make sure your epic monster is able to match up against 4 or 5 other actions every round. So,
Right.
but if it, you know, if it's too powerful, if it's you know, the big attack every time, it's going to grind through the players pretty quickly. I mean, most of that stuff tends to be like little bonuses, getting away from things or avoiding things, or, you know, just a little bit of retribution for, you know, for hitting it or whatnot. But you touched on the point I was going to make, which is when you start adding things like legendary actions and layer actions, you can run into some problems with CR. That, as Kerry said, the basic stuff is pretty easy, but when you start getting into very complicated things that break the action economy, particularly, you really start to struggle as to find, you know, is this going to be, you know, it gets very swingy. Are they going to annihilate it one round? Is it going to annihilate them in one round? And where does it all meet? What I tend to do is, after I've made something and refined it and I like it, I then go to the official books, and there is a bit of variation in those, so you got to be a little bit careful, but I match it up with the other creatures in that CR bracket. I think, and again, I mean, others might have a different experience. I think the monster manual, the CRs are a little underpowered, and in the later books the CRs are a little overpowered. So you start to see a bit of a power creep in the monsters for Mords and Volos, as I think people have begun to realize that particularly hit points are maybe a little bit low on creatures in the monster manual, as we get these new classes that do new damage and players find new ways of combining damage for different things. I tend to find the original monster manual is a little underpowered. Not with everything, of course, it's art, not science, but in most cases they tend to fall a little bit short. So I tend to try and find an analog and match it up and go, okay, well, you know, my CR10 creature with legendary actions, let's flip through the books. Is there another CR10 creature with legendary actions? Is it about the same? Where do they differ? You know, that sort of thing, you know, and you kind of string it all together, and you know, well, you do the best you can with the math, and then you go, right, well, now this is the time to playtest and see how it actually pans out from abstract to practical.
You know, another thing that hit me talking about legendary actions and stuff, there's really kind of 2 types of custom monsters that we've probably dealt with. One is the single use, built on an encounter. You know, this is the ancient undead thing or whatever, that right here, this is the final boss monster, boom. And then there's the monsters that are like, yeah, we made it for this adventure, but we could use them in another adventure that we got going on or whatever. And those are kind of 2 different things, because the epic encounter, this one encounter monster, he's not just standalone. We've built an encounter around him. So like, if the characters get dumped into a room with water that douses all their torches, and suddenly you make sure this creature has dark vision, he's doing advantage on anybody that, you know, can't see. That makes him way more powerful than his stat block says. You know, and so although that technically doesn't affect his CR, it does affect what you're trying to build as a challenge for the players. You know, whereas if there's a bunch of minions running around, some variation on an orc or a goblin or some intelligent mimic or something, that you're like, oh, I love this thing, I'm going to use it next thing, and you find these all through the village and all this stuff. You know, you build that, you have to make him kind of generically, he melds well, and you're more worried about it. You're in one case, you're worried about that encounter being balanced, and the other, you're more worried about that creature being balanced compared to others. So I think there's 2 ways to look at it as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're running right up against the end of our time block here. Does anybody have any final thoughts on custom monsters that we didn't get to that they want to talk about?
I think we need a book on variants of the gelatinous cube. I think that's been decided.
Completely agree. 100%.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you everyone for coming and joining us. Thank you to my great panelists for such interesting conversations, and thank you to the audience for coming and listening to us ramble on about custom monsters. I think Elise, I think you have a shop at Con of Champions, right, or a vendor room? So please.
I can do a quick outro plug.
Yeah,
So
please do.
if you are in the Con of Champions Discord, I'm a perk sponsor, so I do have a booth in the virtual vendor hall. It has links to all my DMs Guild, DriveThruRPG. Micah Watt actually led Blackstaff's Tome of Wizardry, which is showcased there. Yeah, I have Through the Veil, Tales of the Feywild coming out very soon. I just ordered the print preview, so I'm waiting for that to come in the mail and give the thumbs up so we can finally release that. So that's coming out very, very soon. And yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook at DNDElise. Oh, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. If you want to hear yet more about monsters, please come back to our channel tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, noon Central. We're going to have Keith Amon on, who author of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and we'll talk even more about monsters. Anybody else have anything else they want to plug real quick before we take off here?
Oh, sure.
Just
Yeah.
buy everyone on this channel is really good. Just go to DMs Guild and buy all their stuff. It's all very different. Actually, we got a wonderfully eclectic panel here. Everybody's stuff is really good. I promise. I'm not lying. We're all fantastic, and the stuff is all really different. So come and check it out, because honestly, the talent pool on this stream is making me feel a little bit inadequate.
And if any of you want to join in the pool, come on in. The water's fine. Don't be scared. It's everybody I've ever talked to that's creates on there is willing to give you advice and help you out. Micah won't stop talking, so just give it a shot. If you think you got something to share, hey, it's a fun process. And not just buy our products, but a lot of people don't realize reviews and feedback are extremely helpful. If you want to leave a review, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Even if it's not great, we can work on that. We can work with that. Just tell us something.
Absolutely.
Yep, and follow us all on Twitter, and you see our Twitter tags, I think, down underneath, under the right lower corner of our little video thingy. Yep. There.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Everybody, hope you enjoy the rest of the convention, and have a good night. See you, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Good night.